All right, well that's 7 o'clock, so let's get started. So hi everyone, my name is Charles Averill. Today I'll be giving a talk on Python and PyJails. And if you're not familiar with either of those things, then well, you're going to get very familiar throughout this talk. I don't think we need to do attendance because we're online. I don't know. Scan this QR code if you want. It helps us out. I'll leave it up for a couple seconds. All right. And yeah, so if you want to join the Discord to hear about the rest of our talks and DHA and stuff, do that. There's this link here. And Fire Talks. We need to get signups for Fire Talks going. If you have a project you want to talk about in front of people for 5 minutes or so, sign up with this form here, and we're going to do that at the end of the semester. It's going to be a bunch of fun. Make sure to do it. And we have DHA next week. So if you're not familiar with what DHA is, it's a group of cybersecurity professionals from all around Dallas and Fort Worth, and they just get together and they talk about info security. And it's not professional or anything. It's in a karaoke bar, so very laid back. It's a lot of fun. If you have something security related, you can talk there, assuming you sign up in advance. Tons of fun, and if you check the Discord, you'll get that information. So remember, that's next week, so there's not going to be a tech talk. We're all going to be at DHA. All right, so let's get into it. First off, what is a PyJail? If you haven't done CTFs before, this might be, a new topic for you. If you have done CTFs, PyJails aren't extremely common, but anyways, it's a CTF problem in which you'll get a Python interpreter, and you'll be given the task of breaking out of the jail. So that could mean just exiting the interpreter or reading a file, anything like that. But the catch is that they've removed a lot of the functionality of the Python interpreter. And for example, they could remove keywords like import. They could prevent you from using certain functions like open. They can make you only use print, or there's tons of weird things you can do that are really interesting and end up giving you some really interesting challenges. And so because there's all these limitations, a PyJail solution is going to look something like this. And that looks kind of crazy. At least it looked crazy to me when I started doing PyJails, because when I started, I had no idea what to do. I would go look at a write-up, and it would have something like this, and I just would be, abashed by, what this even means. But there is logic behind it, and every choice made in this solution is deliberate. So throughout this talk, we're going to look at, what solutions like this mean, why they work, and then why functionality like this even exists. And there's not a lot of pictures in this presentation, so I figured I would add in a couple intermissions. So here are some cool Pythons to look at. Yeah, all right. So first off, let's go into what CPython is. And so I wouldn't say too many people have heard of CPython, but it can be described as the official reference implementation of the Python programming language. And what that means is that CPython is like the Python interpreter. When you go and download Python with Homebrew or through apt or whatever, you're getting CPython. And so this is the version that's run by the Python organization. It's official. And there's a bunch of other implementations like Jython, Cython, plenty of other things that we're not going to talk about. We're going to be talking about the main implementation today. It is written in a combo of C and Python, which is very interesting because, you would need a version of Python to run the CPython interpreter, and there's like this whole interesting little self-compilation and self-interpreting going on whenever you run the CPython interpreter. And so what it does is, if you're ever working with a big Python project, you'll probably notice that after you run a file, there will be a folder in that project's directory, the root directory, called PyCache, or dunder PyCache dunder. And you'll see these like .pyc files in there, which if you open one up, it looks like a bunch of it looks like a mess. But what that is that's bytecode. So similar to how Java will compile into bytecode and then interpret it, Python does the same thing. It will compile your Python files into PyC files and then interpret the PyC files. And if you don't make any changes to the Python file in between running it, it's not going to recompile because you didn't make any changes, so why bother? And it's just going to interpret. And so PyC files are mostly CPython specific. I say mostly because they're, I believe PyPy, which is another Python compiler, I believe PyPy does also make PyC files. There's other, so like I said, there's other Python compilers like Jython and Cython. Jython is the Java implementation of Python. So it generates class files, which are Java bytecode. And then Cython will generate C files from your Python code. So I think that's more akin to transpilation instead of compilation. But it'll generate C files that you can just compile like normal C files with GCC or Clang or whatever. And so CPython will define lots of like hooks and handles. And these are all functions or types that are defined in C, but they're available in Python. So we're going to get more into that later. So just remember that there are things that are defined in C that you can access through Python. And CPython does contain implementations of all of the built-in functions, which makes sense. Built into the language. This is the language reference. And it's like mostly written in C, but there are a few built-ins that are written in Python, which is interesting. Let me check. If we have any questions, feel free to send them in the chat, and I'll respond to them when I see them. So let's go into some Python object characteristics. So if you've ever worked with Linux, you've probably heard that everything in Linux is a file. And that's just kind of a saying that goes around because it really is. I mean, you can access drives or RAM or, hardware pieces, anything. You can access it like you could like a file, which is really interesting. And the same is sort of true about objects in Python. Basically, everything in Python is an object. Lots of languages like C or Java will have, they call them primitives, which is like an int or a character or long. Anything like that. In Python, those are all objects. Integer is a Python, integer is an object, string is an object, everything's an object. And the one counterexample to this is a function, but even functions have characteristics of objects, which is really interesting. And so you can categorize objects into instances and classes where, and I believe this is correct, an object is either an instance or a class, so it's kind of an umbrella term, but an object will have a dict attribute, which is a dictionary containing all of the readable and writable attributes of the object definition. So if you create a class test and you give it an attribute hello, hello will pop up in that dictionary and you can read and write to it, which is interesting. Instances of objects will have the class attribute, which is just a string containing, well, it's either a string or an object containing the class that instance belongs to. A class will have the bases attribute, which is a tuple containing all of the strict bases of the object. And that's a bit different than this MRO method, which is all of the possible base classes, which basically just means whatever is in bases plus the class itself. We're not going to get into that one. It's kind of useless, I think. And then the class will have a list of subclasses, which is just any class that's derived from the class itself. And this is one of the key functions that we're going to use. And I should, before we go on, there is one more thing. In addition to bases, there is class.base, which I think is just the first class in the bases tuple. And so why does any of this matter? And the answer is that they're the building blocks, the building blocks of most PyJail solutions. And they're also basically the architecture of the language itself. Like we said, everything in Python is an object, so everything in the entire language having these attributes is fairly important. And if you have an understanding of any of these, or any or most of these attributes, you'll definitely be able to find PyJail solutions a lot easier. Here's some more cool Python pictures. Yeah, these are all on Google. You can just scroll for hours. All right, so let's get on to the object class. The object class is the base class of all classes, excluding itself. That's quite a bit of a mouthful. This slide is like that. We're going to get to a diagram later that's going to simplify all of this. But the object class is the base class of all classes, except for itself. The object class does have a few defined functions, and a few of them you can call. But the important thing to note is that all of the object class's functions are implemented in C. And that's going to be important when we get to globals in a second. But just remember that even though the object class has functions that you can call, these functions are all written in C, not Python. And so these functions are called method wrappers. And method wrapper is one of those hooks. It's a type that's defined in CPython. And it's used to denote a function that is written in C and not Python. And this makes sense because object is such a base component of Python that it makes sense that it would be written in C, or at least a large portion of it. And so what's the conclusion? The conclusion is that we can't use an object on its own to help us out with a Python or with a PyJail, because we can't call C functions from Python, or we can't interact with the insides of these C functions because they're not valid Python scopes. And we're going to get more into that on this next slide. So here's a little reminder that classes can use this subclasses method to get a list of all of their derived classes. And so this is very important because the object class, as we said before, it's the base of all classes. So therefore, all classes are subclasses of object. And that's important. I'm not sure why this is a sub-bullet here, but global should be its own thing. This is a bit of a shift off course, but globals is a dictionary. It's a dictionary of attributes that are accessible from any valid Python scope. And by attributes, I mean if you define any variables outside of functions or classes, they're going to be inside globals. There are lots of other, we're going to see in just a second, there's lots of other things that are implemented or that are included within globals. And they're just things that are so necessary to have in a language that you might as well have them in every single scope. And so this hint here, it says methods of classes are valid Python scopes. So if you define a class method, that is a valid Python scope, assuming you do it in Python. If you do it in C, it's not a Python scope, and therefore it's not able to access globals here, which is really important. If you remember before, I said the object class has a bunch of implemented methods, but they're all implemented in C. So none of them can access globals, which is going to be important when we look at our solution. And again, this terminology is very confusing. There's just lots of repeated words here. But anyways, built-ins. These built-ins are super important. These are the functions that I mentioned earlier that are either written in C or Python, and they're so useful that they need to be built into the language, and they need to be accessible from every possible scope. So this is why the built-ins are included inside of the globals. And that these built-ins include things like len or range or open, list, all of these functions that are just, you use them so often that you don't even realize that they're stored somewhere. You just think they're part of the language, and they are. And like I said before, built-ins include open, which is basically the simplest way to open a file. You can also call like os.system or sys.call or anything like that, but open is, I think it's fairly easy to say it's the simplest way to open a file. And there's also other useful things like import, which are good for PyJails with other restrictions, but for the one we're looking at today, you don't really need import. And so I went through my installation of Python, and I found 544 classes that have methods that are implemented in Python. So there's roughly 1,000 built-in classes, and half of those have Python implemented methods, and the other half of them only have C implemented methods. And so remember, only the Python implemented methods have access to globals, which is important because globals contains built-ins, built-ins contains open, and open is how we're going to open our file, which is the way to solve our PyJail. And here's our last intermission. Yeah, that's it. Okay. And so let's look at our graphical review. So on the outside here, we've got CPython. And like we said, it's the interpreter, it's the reference implementation of Python, it's the, it's everything, basically. If you're using Python, you're probably using CPython, so it contains everything. And below this, we've got Python, which is just the language itself, not the interpreter. This is where you don't have, we're looking at an abstracted version of Python here, so not any of the implementation details that CPython deals with. And so we've got this object class, which is sort of in between because a large chunk of it is written in CPython, and a large chunk of it is just inherent to the Python language. And the object class has all these wrappers, those method wrappers that we looked at earlier. And those are things like init, greater than or equal, representation, call. These are all things that are written in C, not Python. And so on the left here, after this first arrow, we've got the class definition. And so a class definition is any, if you define a class, if you make class tests and you make it have an init method and all that, that's a class definition. And so when you just define class test, you don't see it. I mean, you can do it explicitly, but the language will always inherit your class from object, even if you don't tell it to, because that's how the language works. After this second arrow, we've got the class instance, and so you need a class definition to make an instance of that class. And the instance will contain defined attributes like name and dict, and it'll also have methods like init, representation, greater than or equal to, call, all of these things. These are all methods in a class. And because these methods are defined within Python, they are valid Python scopes. And because they're valid Python scopes, they have access to globals, and globals contain the built-ins like open, absolute, range, len, etc., etc. So you might already be seeing how we're going to solve this PyJail now. Yeah, let's get to it. So let's look at this PyJail solution. So I didn't really explain what the limitations were, but the short answer is you're not allowed to call open close parentheses, blah, blah, blah. You need to do something else. And so here we are, and this is our solution. We're going to go through it chunk by chunk to see what it actually means. So this first little bit, we have an open close parentheses, we call class, and then we call base. So this open close parentheses is a tuple. If you're not familiar with Python or maybe MATLAB, a tuple is a collection. It's like a list, but it's just not it's non-mutable, so you can't change the length of it or anything. And it doesn't really matter. We could have picked list or dictionary or anything like that, any collection, or we could have done int or something like that. It doesn't matter, because the next thing we do is we access its class, and after that we access the base of that class. So this class right here is going to give us the tuple class, and then the base of that is going to give us object, because tuple only inherits from object. There you go. You have access to the object class template. And the next thing we're going to do, if you'll remember, every class in Python is a subclass of object. So because we've hit the object class, we can get access to every other class in the entire language. And so I went through this list of subclasses and I looked for a class that had a Python defined init function in it. Because if you'll remember, we need a valid Python scope to call our globals. And so I found this 134th class, or 135th, I guess, which in my installation, it was the printer class. Kind of interesting. I tried this on a few different machines, and it's different on every one, which I think is interesting. So we got access to this printer class that has an init function that is defined in Python. And so what we're going to do now is, if you'll remember, I said that methods do act like objects in some ways. And for example, we can access a method's attributes. And because it's a valid Python scope, we access globals, which is really big. So we've gone halfway through this, and we've never really, none of this looks like standard Python, but it is. And we haven't opened any new objects, we haven't defined any classes, and we already have access to globals, which we weren't allowed to do just from the get-go, because that's how the PyJail worked. And so the next thing we're going to do is, globals is a dictionary, so we're going to access its built-ins key, because it has built-ins in it. And so now we have this dictionary of all of the built-in attributes and functions of the language, which includes open, which is what we were looking for. And so we're going to get this reference to the open function right here in this second little chunk. And just like that, we now have, with this reference, we can just call it like a normal function, and boom, we have opened the key file, which is how we get out, and we can read it. And there you go. You've solved a PyJail without calling open directly. Pretty neat. So why does Python work like this? The short answer is object-oriented programming junk. If any of you know me, you know that I'm not a fan. I switched over to C a while ago, and I've been enjoying it. But if you're ever calling subclasses or globals, this is probably a bad thing, because those are not things you should ever really be doing in normal code. And so as a result, your code is definitely going to be hard to read, or it's going to be vulnerable to issues with scaling. So you're not going to be able to expand your code as fast or as efficiently. And there are real uses for these things, and reflective programming is one of them. Reflective programming is kind of an old term because it used to be more necessary when we were writing assembly on magnetic drums in the 1970s, but we don't really need to do it anymore, and we have lots of better ways to write code. But basically, reflective programming is when you have objects or processes that modify their own behavior as they're running or as they exist, given some different contexts. And it seems cool, and it is, and you'll read stories of programmers from the 70s and 80s. When they were writing assembly, they could change the program as they were running it. And so you hear all these stories about this, and it sounds really cool. Don't ever do this in real life, because it's not the 1970s anymore, and our languages work much better than assembly did back then. So if you catch yourself doing reflective programming, stop and ask yourself if there's a better way to do what you're trying to accomplish, because 99 out of 100 times there is. We're going to look at this list of reflection use cases, and right away I hope that you'll see why the examples for the use cases, explain how bad this practice is. And a better reason to use subclasses and globals and whatnot is debugging object-oriented programming junk. So lots of testing frameworks will use reflective programming. I'm not an expert in that, but that's a way to use subclasses and globals and not be going out of your way to do it. I don't know. Here's some sources. I'm going to post this in the Discord, this slideshow. So if you want to read, these are all really good reads. I mean, this is just the source code for CPython. It's really well written. And then this guide up here, this first link, those two together, you're going to get an appreciation for how CPython works. I wanted to talk more about CPython source code, but I think it's out of the scope of this talk. But you should definitely read all of these if you're interested in what I talked about today, because tons of fun. Highly recommend it. And before we go to the next slide, let's look at this list. Let's look at some reflection use cases. Loading modules and classes from assembly. That doesn't sound like anything anyone does normally. If you're programming with, if you're interacting with assembly from Python, that's kind of weird. This one really gets me. Building new types at runtime. I don't know, if that doesn't stick out to you right away, you've got a bit to learn, because I don't think I've ever heard of anyone building types at runtime, and that seems insane to me. Examining and instantiating types in assembly, like, these are things that most programmers will never have to do. So if you're ever doing things like these, or if you're not doing things like these and you're using reflection, you're probably doing something wrong, and you should probably think of a different way to solve whatever problem you have. And so lastly, I've got a challenge for all of you. I have crafted up a hard PyJail. All right? I called it the Administrative Maximum Security Penitentiary. This is a hard PyJail because it deletes all of your built-ins at the beginning of the jail. So you have to break out of it, and you don't have anything except for these functions, minus exec, because I don't allow exec. You don't have exit or quit. It's crazy, but some friends of mine who work with Python disassembly have told me they think it is possible. So there are lots of easier PyJails out there, and if you've never done a PyJail, probably start with those, and I'll probably send a link in the Discord. But if you have done PyJails before and you want the challenge, I strongly recommend trying this one. It's going to be a lot of fun. So that is my talk. If we have any questions, now's the time. There were a couple things that I did have to gloss over because I didn't think I would have enough time. And I mean, it's only 7:30, so yeah, if you have any questions, if you want me to explain anything else, if there's something you missed, just let me know in the chat right now, and I can help out with that. I'll stick around for about, I don't know, 5, 10, probably 5 minutes. And yeah, if you have anything, just let me know. what's my favorite PyJail? Okay, that's pretty interesting. I think at Sunshine CTF, so that's the one in recent memory for me. At Sunshine CTF, and we did that as a club last semester, there was a PyJail, and it was a gauntlet, so it had, I think, 4 levels of difficulty, and you had to go through all of them to get the full key. And, oh man, what was the one about? Let me look that up. Sunshine 2020 PyJail CTF. I don't think this is Sunshine. Darn. I don't know. Did these guys have a PyJail? I don't know. I can't remember why I liked that one. So I mean, I liked it because I was the first one to solve it, and so that's why I liked it. But here, I mean, if we go on GitHub, we can just look up PyJail, and we'll have a ton of fun PyJails to go through. I mean, yeah, I mean, I might as well go through one of them. Oh, Docker? No, thanks. Auto PyJail? That's kind of interesting. Here, let's do this one. Okay, so it's going to prevent us from doing eval exec import open os read system or write. See, this is something we can solve given our yeah, let's go to, this is something we can definitely solve with the information we have today. PyJail.py. Oh, that's the one. Python PyJail. Okay, so we don't have eval exec import open os read or system. So like, let's see what happens when we try to import os. No, we can't import os. So if you'll see, we have one chance at this. So this is one line, so we can't do a bunch. That's fine. So let's run through what we went through in the talk. So we want to get access to, oh man, what are we even trying to do? Do we want to read a file? It doesn't say. Let's assume that we're trying to break out of this. I know it kicks you out on your own. Well, you know what? Here, let's echo into flag.txt. So let's try to read this flag, okay? So here's what I'm thinking. We open up our tuple, right? We want to get its class. We want to get, so now we have the tuple class. Let's get its base, which is object. And let's get all of those subclasses. Okay, so now we have access to every subclass, or every class in the language. And so I think it was 134. Let's print this out. Oop. I want to see, I want to make sure this is printer because it's different every time. PyJail print. Okay, so this is our printer, so that's good. So we've got the printer, and so let's access its init method, okay? Let's go to globals. We've got access to all the globals now. And so you're thinking, you know, you're telling me, oh, how are we gonna get to os.read, right? Well, okay, wait, hang on. So this is interesting. So, okay, I think I know how we're gonna do this. So open is kind of easy to get around. So let's do built-ins. Okay, so we've got built-ins. And open is super easy because we have to access this with a string, right? And so we can just do this. So we haven't typed open. That's great. And the issue is here. So we've got our flag.txt and our reading. Okay, so we've opened the file here. But now we need to call the read method. And so I want to try something in another. So let's say open flag.txt read. Yeah. Okay, so we've got to call this, but we can't type out read. So we have to find some way to get this as a string, right? And so let me see, what is the, oh, wait, let's do the dictionary. Ooh, okay. About, am I remembering this right? Okay, open it up to the floor. Some comments in stream chat. Oh my gosh. Here, let me attend to that while I think about this. Stream chat. I see you switch. Oh yeah. I did switch from OOP to C and I am enjoying it. Yeah. Another use of reflection is to turn private into public. Okay. I don't know. I'm not a fan of doing things like that. Have you solved your PyJail or did you create it and hope someone else does? I have not solved it. So David works at a Python lab here on campus, and he does like Python disassembly stuff. He tells me it's possible, and I believe him because he's super smart. So no, I haven't solved it. Leaving it up to y'all. Reflection used to do some third-party patching at runtime. That is insane. These are reasons why we should not be using object-oriented programming. Okay, so here, I'll leave this open so I can read as y'all type. Okay, so how are we going to call this? How are we going to call this read method? I'm thinking. I don't know, this is when I start Googling, right? Wait, so is this a class? Is open a class? io.text wrapper. So let's see, get functions of class Python. I thought it was just dir, right? Dir io.text I don't think this is gonna work. Dir open flag.txt r. Oh, it does. Okay. So open flag.txt r. There we go. Okay, so this is how we're gonna do it. Let's go up to our. Okay. Yeah. So we've got this open object, right? So we're gonna call it. Oh, but the dir is just a list, right? Can we do open flag.txt r read? Is that valid? No, it's not. Properties, opt parse, inspect, dictionary of. I feel like this was in my talk. Wait, yeah, let's scroll down. Yeah, .dict. I think I already tried that though. Yeah, I already tried that. Mode R. I don't know. What do y'all think? Y'all have any? Oh man, here I'm literally giving the PyJail talk, and I can't get this PyJail. That's kind of funny. Not gonna lie. Stack Overflowing at the end of my talk. Dict key value. fair. That's fair. So let me look at this again. Open file.read. So we can't use eval, exec, import, open, os. Okay, so I think, let's back up a little bit. So we've got the built-ins, right? So we can access exec the same way we were going to do open, right? So we can do this and this. So we've got exec, and so now we can call a string. So what are we going to do? We're going to run do this, open flag.txt r.re plus ad, boom, boom, boom. All right, taking bets. You think this is going to work? I think this is going to work. Or I think we're very close to the right solution. Oh, but I didn't print it. Yeah, I need to print it. Oops. Copy. Oh, crap. That's okay. Ooh. Man, I hate when my terminal does this. So we're going to call print op plus en flag.txt r. Let's extend this more. And we're going to call it .re. Oh, wait. Print. Yeah, re plus ad, open close. Invalid. Oh, oops, man. I think I backspaced too many times and my terminal messed up. So class dot b. Okay. Oh, one more parenthesis. Okay, we're so close, y'all. We're so close. Class dot b parenthesis, close parenthesis. Unmatched. Oh my goodness. Oh wait, so let's look at that error again. I think that was the wrong parenthesis. Oh, I need to close the print parenthesis inside. Yeah. Okay. So close. Boom! And there we go. We did it. We solved the PyJail. That was our flag. If you didn't see it, that's our flag, and we did it. And look how long our solution is. So we didn't call open like we did in the presentation. We had to call exec so that we could call open. So there we go. There you go. We got to see a little bit of a Python thing in action. I don't know. I know it took a little while, and I was supposed to be an expert or something, but yeah. If we have any other questions, feel free to ask them. I'm open. The floor is open. I know, it's insane. It's crazy. I don't like object-oriented programming, but I do like Python. It's a very cool language. Lots of insane things you can do with it. Again, I guess while I'm waiting, I see people typing. While I'm waiting for questions, I will show y'all the stuff I read. How did I get so good at this? I've done like 50 PyJails. I was on a CTF team in my freshman year, and I'm really bad at everything, basically. Except I can do a couple web things, and I can do a little bit of cryptography, but I did a lot of software development in Python, and so I was like, oh, why don't I just like be really good at PyJails? And so I remember I did like PyJails for 2 weeks, and ta-da! That's how I got good at PyJails, and they're super easy. I mean, I know this talk was kind of convoluted, but I don't know. It's fun. Y'all should definitely try them out. Or if you're insane, you'll write a package manager in Python. No thanks, that's too much for me. Here, just a little bit longer. I'm gonna go into. I'm gonna go into the data model. The data model is cool. This is where I got a bunch of the information. I don't know, a lot of this has nothing to do with what we talked about, but it talks about other cool implementation details of Python. When I started researching for this talk, this was like the only reference I could find for how Python objects worked, and I was so disappointed that I would have to like read it. But it's actually really interesting, and I regret not reading it earlier. So when I post this, y'all should go look at these links. This guide is incredible. I did email the dude who wrote this because the PyJail I was planning to offer is actually a lot harder than the one that I have up here. I'm working on compiling a version of Python that doesn't have any built-ins, which is much harder than just removing the built-ins. Help in the Python interpreter is a good read and always available. Let's do that. I've used help before, but you can just do. Oh, okay. This is pretty interesting. I thought it was just. Sheesh. Yeah, this is cool. I will give this a try later. I don't know. Cool. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, this is a really good read. Highly recommend. Python's innards. Oh man, this is a beast. I read a little bit of it, but what I did read was good. So definitely check it out if you have lots of time to burn. And I guess I'll go into this one. This is the last thing I'll show off. These are just structures that are available in CPython that you can mess with. And so like you can see like lots of like these language features exist in C, so that you can use them when you're writing CPython, but they're not really I don't know. It's a goal of mine eventually to contribute to CPython, so I guess I need to read more about this, but lots of cool stuff happening here. So yeah, if there's no other questions, I see 2 people typing. Yeah, if we have anything else, CPython innards are pretty cool. I agree, and it's so well documented too. Like, like everything is so pretty. Like, to anyone who hasn't seen C before, this looks like a mess, but to those chads out there who write C all the time, this is like, oh man, it looks nice. There's comments everywhere. This is awesome. I'm always happy when I hear people say reading source code in fun. It seems, yeah, reading source code is hella fun. I love it. Yeah, CPython and then Clang. If you guys, if you're interested in I don't know, contributing to big open source projects, Clang is, I'm told it's super easy to read, and I've read a little bit of it, and I don't understand what's going on, but it looks pretty, and there's comments. But yes, I agree. Python source code, very, very nice to read. I don't know. Java JVMC. I don't know. Let's look that up while we're at it. I don't know. I don't even think I'm looking up the right thing. Yeah. I don't know. This one doesn't look too bad, but I don't think I'm even looking up what you're talking about. Java sources. I mean, is like the, where's the Open JDK source code? I don't know. Let's look at HTTP server. Oh, well, that doesn't really help us. I don't know. Okay, well, it was nice reading source code with y'all, and I don't think, it doesn't seem like we have any other questions, so thank you for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Feel free to message me on Discord after the stream. I can answer any other questions you have. Remember that we don't have a meeting next week. We have DHA, and if you check the Discord, you'll find out what's going on there. Yeah, thank you all. Have a good night, and stay warm and safe. All right, bye.